We are back with the breaking news that every Alabama fan in the country and the world simply never wanted to see, that Nick Saban is stepping down. Chris Lowe reporting to us that, and others, including our next guest, that he informed his team this afternoon. We'll try to sort it all out, and that's all I can promise. We were just having a nice, relaxing, easygoing Wednesday afternoon when this happened. Bruce Feldman joining us from The Athletic and Fox, also with the story, and we'll try to put it into as much perspective as we can. Bruce, good afternoon, and I know this is fresh on everyone's mind, but your thoughts hearing this news.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning, obviously. I mean, this was a day a lot of us were wondering when it would come. Earlier today, the rumors started to swirl that there could be some news from Nick Saban tonight. And I was very skeptical. I did speak to somebody a few hours ago who's pretty close to Saban, who that wouldn't shock me, but the timing, this person didn't know anything that it would happen tonight. And then we started to talk a little more, and I was at the Rose Bowl last week, and one thing that I did think about today was after the game, I remember waiting with a few other people outside the Michigan locker room, and a golf cart with Nick Saban in it had come back from the post-game press conference, and he was kind of stuck. The cart had to slow down and stop because there was a cluster of people around, and these people saw Saban in there, and Nick Saban kind of turned and kind of gave almost like it was like a little bit of a wave and had a smile on his face. And I was just thinking, it was like that was not kind of how I would have expected him to look in that moment. It wasn't like the infamous kind of Urban Meyer pizza box scene after a Big Ten title game loss. It was more just. I don't know. You go back to his comments after the game, and I think he knew he did an amazing job, especially this year, and how much that team had improved. And again, once at that age, I don't think any of us should be surprised when somebody's like, you know what, there's this job, especially as a college football coach now, with the NIL, with the portal, and everything, and the crazy schedule the way it is. I mean, it grinds people away, and he did it for a long time, and he did it better than anybody's ever done it in this sport. So I guess we shouldn't be shocked that today is that day.
Bruce, I realize that nobody knows what tomorrow brings, but you are one of these people that is so plugged in and has his hand and eyes on what is happening. So I say that to ask you the question that won't be today's story, but it will certainly be the story tomorrow, and that is, who is next?
I mean, there's a bunch of guys, not only did he bring a lot of national titles to Tuscaloosa, he also brought the biggest coaching tree and the most fruitful coaching tree in the sport. And so there's a lot of guys who spent time in Tuscaloosa and learned under Nick Saban that I think will get consideration. I mean, look, Dan Lanning was a GA there. He's done a terrific job in a couple of years at Oregon. He's got a really good situation there. He's got a loaded team as they move into the Big Ten. I would think that's a call that Greg Byrne in Alabama, may make. I know Steve Sarkisian impressed folks in Tuscaloosa when he was an assistant there. And I'm sure he impressed them when his team came to Tuscaloosa earlier or last year and beat the Tide, and he led them to a playoff. Now, he's got a really good job too at Texas as they're moving into the Big 12. But again, I think those are names that really stood out to me from when I started to think, who are the guys that are very well regarded there and have done a really good job. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you hear Kalen DeBoer's name, because he has won everywhere he's been, and it took him only 2 years to get Washington turned around. And he's a different personality. He has never been in the SEC, and he's not been of the Saban tree. And so I don't know, I know they now have the same agent, Jimmy Sexton, so I wouldn't rule that out. But again, it's not somebody who's worked in the SEC, so I don't know how that would play. But to me, he's a top 5 or 6 coach in college football. It's just he's very different from what they just had there in terms of style, and that doesn't mean it couldn't work. But I think those are the names that I would keep an eye on at this point. Those were the first 3 that came to mind from conversations
Bruce,
that I've had in the past.
Bruce, on Dan Lanning, certainly the buyout, all these things, I don't know how much this really matters anymore when you're talking about a school like Alabama, but assuming the call came to Dan Lanning, is it your best guess that he would take it?
It's one thing to take it out of discussion. It's another thing to say, I'm going to move my family and jump in and be the guy who tries to replace Nick Saban.
Right.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, everything I know from Dan is he and his family really like it where they're at. And I think he knows he's got a good situation. He's built a good staff. He's recruited exceptionally well. I could see why Alabama would be really impressed by Dan Lanning. I could see why Dan Lanning would be interested. I just don't know. To be the guy who's going to replace Nick Saban, I mean, as you know, we're talking about the greatest college football coach in the history of the sport. That is going to be a really tough job. You just think about like what the bar becomes at that point. I mean, if you're Dan Lanning, you sit there and say, my team is built to make a run, not just at the playoff now, at the 12-team playoff, but certainly to maybe dominate the Big Ten. Is that a situation where you're like, you know what, that could be great, and I can make my own legacy here? I don't know. I think that's a lot for him or whoever else Alabama ultimately targets to sort out.
Bruce, one last question. You mentioned Sarkisian. Certainly, he is doing quite well at the University of Texas, but he's also well liked in Tuscaloosa. How would you characterize where he is right now and the likelihood or unlikelihood that he would take the job?
That's a great question. I know he's really well regarded in Tuscaloosa. I thought about that a lot today. He's got a big job. He's built that place back up. He's going into the same league that Alabama's in. It's hard to say. Like one place, again, it's dealing with the shadow of Nick Saban. I think that's just such a big thing because, yes, Texas is a terrific job. Mac Brown obviously won a national title there. I think you could certainly win national titles at both places. He didn't feel like he was that far off from making a title run this year. And he's going to leave behind, I'm not leave behind, but he has a team in the pipeline right now that should be a legit, top 5 caliber team. So it's not like, he's already done the heavy lifting of the rebuild. I'd be curious to see what he would think. I mean, ultimately, again, it's the shadow of Nick Saban. That is not going to be easy for somebody to walk into. They're going to have big options and big names, and they obviously have a ton of money and a ton of resources. But I just think that, it's going to take a very special, competitive person to want to say, all right, I'm going to leave what I have and then jump into the middle of the biggest spotlight you can imagine if you're a football coach.
Bruce, many thanks. I know it's short notice. We appreciate it. We will be in touch and hopefully can catch up tomorrow about what's next. Thank you, Bruce Feldman, joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
From The Athletic.
Give me something.